Hi, everyone, and welcome to Ancestry Unpacked tips for the 22nd of May, 2026. My name's Michelle Patient, and today we're going to cover some tips and insights into DNA, particularly focusing on regions, journeys, and why they change. So, this is what my summary report looks like for my DNA results with Ancestry. And you can see I've got 4 different kind of reports here. And today I'm going to focus on the first 2, and I'm going to look at the others in future DNA tips in our Ancestry Unpacked series. So to talk about the region report first, the key thing to know and remember is that it's geographic areas where some, not all of our ancestors were about 1,000 or more years ago. You don't inherit DNA from every single ancestor you ever had. So it's not possible for the regions to show every ancestor you've ever had in them. And based on the way DNA is passed down to us, we're only ever going to get a range of amounts and estimated amounts for this process. So unlike many other forms of genealogy evidence, these are estimates rather than discrete facts. And the other thing to remember is that regions are defined by a company's scientists who've built up a series of reference panels. Each testing company's panels are unique to them. And as the scientists do science, which is to continually review and change their philosophy or their understanding or gain more insight over time, these regions and their boundaries will change. Journeys are calculated quite differently to regions, and our DNA as customers is part of that rather complex process. You don't need to understand it, just like we don't need to understand all the inner workings of a car, but we know enough to know the tools to drive it. It also only reflects the story from some of your ancestors' migrations, but it's a much closer time frame. It's right at the edge or within our time frame. So it's up to 300 years ago, but in some cases it's far more recent than that. The help pages on Support Centre on the Ancestry website has information of use to us, and the links are in your notes. But the key things about the reference panels are that they explain to you about the number of samples, how they've developed 146 regions, and you kind of end up in a bucket. You either match enough people in this region to be considered have origins in it, or you do not. And so it's a bit of a complex process. Thank goodness there are people behind the scenes doing it for us. And ancestral journeys are even more processed through multiple steps from multiple sources, which does ultimately include family tree information. Again, great help files so you can read more about it. But let's look at why it's useful to us. So in this combination of various pieces of information with journeys can show us typical migration paths and typical migration timing as well. So here's a group of migration from Munster in Ireland that typically went to the US in the 1870s and went to 4 different specific areas of the US. So looking now in depth at mine, we're going to head to the regions first. So I've clicked on that first tab, got our regions report, and you'll see we've moved from summary across the top to origins, and we have a series of subheadings, regions, journeys, and by parent we're going to come to later in the series. So in my regions, lots of percentages, but what am I always going to do, particularly if it's new to me? There's a down arrow in the bottom left. So I'm going to scroll down to see what other info is available to me. And I'm going to keep scrolling down so that I've seen the whole page before I start digging in, because it's a fundamental importance to all of us to understand the records we're looking at before we dive into them, so we can better interpret what we're seeing. So you might like to come here because this will easily quickly take you through, if you click on the various links here, take you through to the support centre and the help files. But going back to just under all those percentages, there's this little sign here you might miss. We compare your DNA to a worldwide reference panel to see which populations your DNA most looks like. I'm saying it out loud because so many times I see that the reference panels are based on customers' data, and I want to reinforce that nowhere in the documents does it say that. It's very clear to us on the main page that it's actually a worldwide reference panel. And we can even click on how to calculate it and understand it, get some more information here, and go right through to the white papers about this process. White papers are scientific papers presented to the science community that are peer-reviewed, so things we can rely on. So we look into those regions. Here's the current 146. You can see almost all of the planet is covered. That many regions have nothing to do with current government boundaries. So even though we may use, as we do in our day-to-day language, I'm Irish or I'm Scottish, that's not necessarily a government boundary, but it's more something we associate with as coming from an area. Almost all of these regions don't actually fall along the borders between current countries. Particularly check out the Northern America boundary, which is quite halfway up Canada. There's only a handful that actually seem to line up, and they're usually because we don't have enough information yet. I can see other things in here, like there are geographic boundaries of mountain ranges that very much define the movement of people over time that limit them. So if we dig into one of these regions, here's the various regions within Western Europe. And because there's a scroll bar there, you can see some of these were new regions with the last update. Some were updated as they were refined with more info. But if we scroll down, we'll see there's quite a few regions. And then we see some journeys as well that are sub-journeys within this. And so you can even drill into each of these to see those journeys. And notice all the other regions had solid coloured dots next to their names. These journeys have dotted lines around them. For those of you that have been around a while, they used to be called communities, and now they're called journeys because they better reflect the movement of our people rather than staying in one place as communities are usually defined as doing. And you can see there's quite intense overlap just even in this eastern part of England, that there's quite a lot of movement within this group too. So internal migration as well as external migration out into other parts of the planet. If I look at the central Scotland and Northern Ireland, the people in these communities for generations freely moved between these areas and weren't bounded by country borders at all. So there's a kind of significant gene pool that covers this geographic area that's readily identifiable compared to other parts of the planet. So let's look at me, and I have said multiple times they're estimates. So, I'm mostly English with a bit of Celtic Gaelic on the side and a little bit of Jewish according to the breakdown of 66, 30 and 4%. If I click on one, so let's look at the Ashkenazi Jew, you'll see solid block of colour covering quite a large geographic area. And there's what the colours mean. Have you ever clicked on that? I encourage you to do so. And you'll see that most people will actually have this covered. It's a very defined boundary. It's a very defined DNA pool of data that's quite specific to this community. And I hope the eagle eyes of you notice the little eye next to the 4. And if you click on that, you'll actually see the range of this percentage. So in my case, somewhere between 3 and 4%, but leaning towards the higher end of that range. So they've put forward as 4% as where I most likely sit, remembering it's an estimate. If I go and look at my Scottish and Irish DNA segments, I cover a wider area and it's got a bit of a bleeding edge. It's got a light area and a dark area. So there's some movement outside of this core area. So I'm more likely to be one from the other, maybe, maybe not. And you can see it's covering both Scotland and Northern Ireland. But my range here is quite different. It's from 3 to 17%, but I've been given 12%. So the frequency isn't bang on the middle of the average. It's where I'm more frequently showing and I'm more frequently matched towards that upper range. So instead of being 10% bang in the middle, I'm actually estimated to be around 12. I expect these to change as well over time. The most interesting one, of course, is Wales popped up for me for the first time. You can see it covers a much wider area of England in that light blue colour, but my percentage is 0 to 5%, and they're estimating it at 1. So I could be nothing. I could have had no long-term ancestors from there. And the thing about overall migration within the UK is there was a very much a trend for some communities to keep moving westward as invasions happened. So a lot of people from the eastern and northeastern sides moved west and may end up being for many generations in the Wales area, but actually they've originally come further back from England, but all well bound, the majority of our paper trails. So if you don't like change, maybe you don't want to look too hard, but the good thing to me is that these get better defined, refined, and improve over time. No two companies are more accurate than anybody else. They just have different reference panels. So this is how my mother's looked, because we tested at the very beginning of Ancestry being available to us in our region of the planet. And this was about the first update when first genetic communities were available. And back in the days when it was called an ethnicity estimate. And you'll see the dotted lines defining some areas of Scotland, breaking it down instead of one big blob. And you'll see, though, everything else is kind of broad brush. Whereas if you look at my mum's regional distribution today, much more discrete. Quite specific regions as those reference panels have given much more accurate focus for us and the company that gives us our information. So I do really now know I need to go and check Cornwall and Devon and Somerset out for my mum for one of her unknowns. The first company I ever tested with, though, was much earlier in DNA testing, and this is my showing right at the bottom of the screen, my very small amount of West Indian ancestry that I carry. And she's one of the reasons I tested in the first place was to help me identify Anne and where she came from. So I'm always delighted to see this. And I'm seeing slightly different breakdowns of the Jewish community here into more discrete units, whereas I'm not seeing so much of that within the United Kingdom and Ireland. So it's a different set of reference panels, a different set of results. But I'm still broad brush covering the same regions of the planet. And the company I tested with most recently also has different reference panels. So you can't really compare them all to each other beyond saying, broad brush, I'm very European. And mostly if I look at my percentages, I'm incredibly Celtic and English. So let's look at the journey part because that's much closer to our documented family trees and is for more in-depth use to us to apply it to our research. So if I click on the journey tab, I get this. I've got 2. And if I read first, it says this is going to be your past 300 years in case you missed it. And if you press on how it works, you'll actually see how they determined it. And again, this is taking you a direct link through to the science behind it if you'd like to read more. And I would encourage you all to at least go and have a look if you don't fully understand the details. So looking at my ancestral journeys, I should know that I need to scroll down. And so when I scroll down, I'll see that I have some other information. And again, journeys by parent we'll touch later. And if I keep scrolling down, the journeys to compare, I'll also touch in the later tip. But down the bottom again, the quickest way to get to the support centre is through these various links at the bottom, so you can better understand what they show to you. But it's a grouping of people who travelled and have common populations between the last 300 to maybe even you're lucky 50 years ago. So again, coming back to my main screen, let's look at this timeline aspect. So if I click on the timeline, I've got 6 ancestors with enough data that matches the DNA, that I've inherited enough DNA from these people, that I get some timeline movements. And you'll see down the left column is the timeline, and every 50 years, and then we get into every 25, I actually have human heads beside them, little stylized people. So in other words, I have people on my tree covering all these time frames. And if I click on different time frames, the first one that I have with movement out into England from my biological tree is this group here between 1825 and 1850. And you'll see I actually have quite a few of them, but I just clicked on the first one for you, Charles Matthew Day. And this is the map I get. Now, if I scrolled about, I'd see the other places he lived. But my problem is I need to do more research. And that's the best thing this journey has shown me, is that I need to dig in because I've still yet to confirm his death date. I can see that the last evidence I have for him is the 1901 census. So what happened to him after that? I can see that his wife's census data stopped in 1890 because she died in 1900. I now need to realise I need to research all the siblings to see whether Dad might have been living with one of them in 1911. And I need to check all their marriages to see was the father living or deceased, so I can narrow that time frame down, because there's a tremendous number of Charles Days to buy death certificates for otherwise. So it's one of the benefits of drilling into these journeys. And the other one is really showing other people who aren't as interested in the details about the visual movement of your family around the planet. So being fair and looking at both my journeys, here's my New South Wales mob, and you can see the main birth centres of those people when they arrived were out either in the Parramatta or the Liverpool settlement, certainly early settlers down in Bundeena, and then of course the main settlement of Port Jackson. You can see right there where there's 8. But overall, some actually were born around the colony further places, and I can again see that I had no people in my tree from 1775 because I have no First Nations ancestors. That time frame is prior to arrival, and my biological family all arrived after 1800, whereas if I included my adopted tree, and I'm hoping the beta version of this will allow me to map my future family of my adopted family, I will have a few people back at pre-1800, and I'll see the internal movements there. But this is what my tree looks like right now, and you can see it still says beta in green there, and I've got some potted history of what was going on and why people came out, particularly under Governor Macquarie, and I had a number of people actually come with Governor Macquarie and participate in that process of time. But because they weren't born out here, they don't show on it. So at this stage, it's just showing births and death locations. If I drill into Robert Reid, who was from Belfast, you can see his little baby crib in the top left-hand corner and his headstone symbol in the bottom right. And again, I could drill in and have a look at all his movements around as I added more addresses to him from directories and so forth. So it kind of gives you a bit of a drive to find some more information as well. So I'm hoping that in a nutshell helps you understand the difference between the two, why can't compare everyone to everybody else, why they're going to change over time, and again, all the links to these various frequently asked questions and more in-depth papers are in the notes for you. So thanks all for watching. A reminder that we'll be back next week. I'll actually have the next DNA tip next Friday for you, and the webinar will be the following first Friday in June. So till then, thank you very much for watching, everybody, We'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.